was a regular day in a regular town. A day that should have had a regular end. You see, this regular mom made her regular son lunch. 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread. And I wonder what he thought of himself like. Just another regular day. Probably go along my regular way. Probably call up my regular babe, do some regular things, regular. No idea that he already had an appointment with God to feed thousands. No idea he'd be Uber Eats for a savior. I have a question. When you got up this morning, washed your face, brushed your teeth, glared at yourself in the mirror, did you think just another regular day? Probably go along my regular way. Did it ever cross your mind or your heart that God has an appointment with you to feed thousands? It was a hot day in Samaria. A woman's thirst drew her to the well around 12 to avoid the other women. You know, the other women. Their conversations were always so toxic. Their lipstick must have been poisoned. Their skin felt like sandpaper to her. Their hugs always left her feeling so uneven, so she avoided them, got water at 12. And I wonder what would have happened if she thought, I'm just regular. She has a conversation with another man, and somehow it installed plumbing in her soul. Something about the tongue of Jesus put plumbing in her throat, made her throat a geyser of love and truth. And what would have happened if she stayed in bed with another water balloon? I mean, man, these things that were born to burst that will never satisfy thirst, convinced she was regular. It was a young boy. Hands covered with the blood of the bear he killed. His father taught him to defend his sheep, to lay his life down for them. I wonder what would have happened. When Samuel's horn was turned over, he said, no, I'm too regular. He would never have become the man who defeated a giant, who was the greatest king Israel ever had. And there was another boy whose father's leaving put a trip in his own tongue. He stuttered all the way through middle school, first year of high school. No one ever told him he was smart, just big and strong. They gave him a basketball. Funny, our basketball courts can become cemeteries for black boys, their dreams and imaginations. It's funny how many young men who should be making applications and scientific applications are being choked in practice jerseys because they've been never told they could dream or think that this is what black men do, what black people do. They're just convinced that this is regular. And if no one ever told that boy over Little Caesar's Pizza, I would never be the husband, the pastor, the father that I am today, I've come to remind you that we have to be careful that our hope does not get an ulcer. I know what it is to build life and make your plans like sand castles, and I know what happens when you try to take it home. You realize that our plans are the sandcastles to the ocean of his will. But let me tell you, that he will build more with you than you ever thought yourself. So be like the boy. Give up your 2 fish and 5 loaves and watch him prove that he's able with your Lunchable. How you give your little bit to a masterful master chef and they will feast on your testimony. Be like the woman. And let him fulfill every thirst in you, and watch how your presence becomes a sprinkling system of love and joy to dry places. And be like David, find sheep worth fighting bears for, fighting lions for. And if you do this, I promise you will never have a regular day. No matter where you are, it will not be a regular town. And because of his will in you, don't ever expect a regular end. Because what if Jesus Christ died on the cross so that we would never be regular again?